Attention, armchair quarterbacks and shower thought GMs. It's time for this week's episode of SportsBall with Mike Maharrey and Alan Mosley.
Welcome back for episode 2 of SportsBall with Mike Maharrey and Alan Mosley. Guys, if you enjoy what we're doing here, because goodness knows we enjoy what we're doing, don't we, Mike?
Oh, absolutely.
And really, that's all that matters, is that we enjoy it.
That's true.
Well, there you go. Guys, if you enjoy what we're doing, you can find us on the web at your favorite podcast platform of choice. Just search SportsBall with Mike and Alan, exclusively produced by Little L Productions, which is also the home of great shows such as The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley, The Sherry Voluntary Show, Postcards from Somalia, and more. Is that all of our housekeeping, or do we have any websites to talk about?
We will have a website eventually, and you can find us on Facebook, which is at SportsBall Podcast, if I remember correctly.
SportsBall Podcast. So that's going to be the URL of the website, right? A SportsBall Podcast.
Yes, it is. That's the plan.
There you go. So really, there's just no excuse. If you're not consuming SportsBall material, then there's just something wrong with you.
Absolutely. I do want to bring this up. It's kind of housekeeping. I just want everybody to know that we will not be accepting any endorsements from Nike. No, wait a minute. I said that wrong. We will absolutely take any endorsement from Nike. Please call me or email me. We'll get that set up. We would love to have Nike as a sponsor.
So guys, listen up at home. Look, we understand you're frustrated, and we're going to actually have a live SportsBall mass burning of Nikes. So everybody mail us your Air Jordans, and we will take care of them for you.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to burn them all. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So anyway, how about this weekend, man? College football.
Well, it was practically half the week, wasn't it? Like, we started college football on Thursday when we were taping episode 1 of our show, and then we had college football Friday and Saturday and Sunday and Monday night.
Yes, we did. It was a beautiful thing. I enjoyed every minute of it.
It was. Well, I did too. But, I'd actually told you a couple of days ago that this time of year is such a great time of year because hope springs eternal for all college football fan bases out there for the start of a new season. But, by Sunday night, really it only springs eternal for about half.
Yeah, weeds out half of them right there.
Yeah. Speaking of some of the ones that got weeded out, just our most recent game last night, Florida State and Virginia Tech. I know Mike, being an old timer like he is, he couldn't stay up all night to watch that game. And Mike, I got to tell you, you didn't miss anything.
No, I didn't. Here's what I learned. Florida State still has the coolest tradition in college football with the Osceola and the Flaming Spear. And anybody who wants to can fight me on that. And then the second thing that I learned is that Florida State has absolutely no offensive line. That was the most pathetic offensive line performance I've seen in a long time. I mean, they couldn't block anybody.
Yeah, well, it's particularly bad because, last season got derailed pretty much from the get-go when their starting quarterback went out with a season-ending injury. And so there was, new coach, Willie Taggart comes in, lots of hype for this year. They're, key players or skill guys are coming back healthy. They're ready to get things kicked off. And, of course, Florida State, Virginia Tech is an old-time rivalry. But Boomer Ball strikes again, even though Boomer's not around, or Beamer Ball strikes again. I mean, you had turnover after. I think Florida State ended with 4 or 5 turnovers. I think a couple fumbles. I think QB had 3 picks. Definitely not the return from injury that he would have liked. But in his defense, not only is he probably shaken off a little rust, but I mean he's not really a mobile quarterback. He's one of these guys that if you're listing him as dual threat, that's probably not exactly fair because he's really more of a pocket passer than dual threat. But you couldn't tell from last night because he was running for his life the moment he took the snap.
One thing we know is his knee works. So I guess that's good news for them. I was kind of worried about the dude. I mean, the Virginia Tech defensive line literally spent the entire game in the Florida State backfield. And that's, I think, in all fairness, I think Virginia Tech's probably a little better than maybe we thought. That defense looks solid.
Oh yeah, no, Virginia Tech, Justin Fuente, his name kind of bounced around a little bit when UT was looking at hiring 17 different guys as their head coach for this year. I didn't think he was a realistic proposition because he had just recently got the gig at Virginia Tech, and he's doing a great job there. I think Virginia Tech's got a bright future. Looking through the AP top 25 really quick, the top basically doesn't change. Ohio State and Wisconsin flip-flop between fourth and fifth. I don't totally understand that, but they do. Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Oklahoma, they had no problems. Auburn really gutting out the win over Washington. That was probably the game of the weekend, and a top 10 matchup in week 1.
Yeah, I think that was the best game. I like defensive football anyway, and that was two defensive games. I think I mentioned to you when we were texting back and forth, I think that Washington may end up being better than Auburn by the end of the year, but I think you saw a prime example of defenses being ahead of offenses. And that Auburn defense was shutting them down there, especially in the fourth quarter. It would be interesting to see them play again later in the year once the rust and the newness wears off of that Washington offense.
Well, Washington, even with the loss in week 1, they managed to stay in the top 10 of the AP, which sort of sets the rest of the season's tone for them, that if they win out, they still have a really, really good chance to be in the playoffs because they really didn't drop very far. Stanford rounding out of the top 10, which has a huge game with USC coming up this week. LSU knocking on the door at 11 after a walloping they put on Miami. And I know I told you this snarky comment earlier in the weekend. There was a little pregame altercation between the two teams on the field before kickoff. And it's really a shame that was about the only fight that Miami showed that day.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost felt like I should give up my podcasting SportsBall credentials when thinking back that, yes, I did say that Miami was my dark horse to make it to the playoff. Now Miami's my dark horse to maybe, I don't know if they can even win their division in the ACC. They were awful. And in all fairness, they showed a lot of the same problems that they did last year. They didn't really have a running game. And last year they lived and died on takeaways. I think they were the number 1 team in the Division 1 in takeaways last year, and they lost their last 4 straight games, and that takeaway factor had disappeared late last year, and we saw no takeaways in this last game. So,
well, that reminded me perfectly of the Chicago Bears of the late 90s, 2000, early teens, where they totally lived and died by the turnover margin. And if the defense could come up with the 2 or 3 really fortuitous takeaways in other teams' side of the field, definitely if they could get a defense or special teams score, that took a little bit of pressure off an otherwise outmanned and outgunned Bears offense, and they won more than they lost. But just like with Miami, you can teach that, right? Like, you can have a ball hawking defense that's better than most at grabbing the ball, but there's still some luck involved. If the quarterback's just not placing the ball where you can make a play on it, for better or worse, if the running backs are putting 2 hands on that rock every time they cross the line of scrimmage, it's just hard to get turnovers. And if you live and die by the turnover margin and you're not picking them up, you're losing games.
Right. And live and die is part of that equation, and I think that's what we've seen out of Miami this last several games that they played, going back to last year. Here's a fun stat for you. This is the first time since 1975 that both Florida State and Miami were 0-1 after the first game of the year. So not much joy for those Florida teams, although the Gators look good. Of course, you're going to look good playing Charleston Southern. And
You don't say.
Yeah, right. And my alma mater, USF, South Florida, they knocked off mighty Elon. So those two teams are 1-0. Woo!
And so wrapping up the new top 25, you got Virginia Tech moved all the way up to 11th. Penn State, West Virginia coming off of their really just last second gut-wrenching win over UT. Am I right?
Yes.
Michigan State, TCU, USC, Mississippi State, and then rounding out the top 20 is UCF and Boise State. So it's we're only 1 week into the season, and it pretty much already looks like your Game of 5 Big Bowl representative is going to come down to Mountain West Boise State or East Coast UCF. It's going to be one or the other.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of that UCF game. Of course, we've already established in episode 1 that I hate them, so go Boise State. But yeah, that's what it's looking like. Boise State, they struggled a little bit early, but they kind of got on track late in that game and ran away with it. So
yeah, I'm actually wearing my Boise State T-shirt right now. I think that they're the odds-on group of 5 favorite this year. I mean, UCF of course is on a multiple season win streak, and there's every reason to believe that they can continue it. But I think Boise State has a little bit more national respect than UCF does. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I absolutely consider UCF last year's national champions. Yeah, I totally do.
Well, they got rings, supposedly.
but with that said, UCF is sort of kind of flamed up in the last year or so after coming off of like literally winless seasons, whereas Boise State has been a perennial 8-10 plus win team for probably 10-15 years now. So they've got a little bit more national respect. Rounding out the top 25 is a loser Michigan, a loser Miami, Oregon, South Carolina, and Florida cracks the top 25. So is there anything in there that leaves you scratching your head, or you feel like, no, that's pretty good for week 1?
Yeah, I think maybe Virginia Tech. I don't know that they should have quite moved up that far. That's really the only thing that kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah,
I think it's pretty fair. I mean, really week 1. What do you really know after week 1? I think as we get into week 2 and 3, we'll start to see a little bit better. What kind of consistency some of these. How about the SEC, though? Break up the SEC, man. Every team except for Tennessee won their opening game in the SEC. So
well, that was the last thing I was going to say to finish our last week recap, is that I don't know if this is the first time in history for any team ever, but every single team in the SEC, granted it's only week 1, of course, right. Every single team in the SEC is undefeated except for Tennessee, which is winless. Probably could only happen after week 1, but that's right. Quite a statistic to take home. So now to be fair to poor UT, of course, not only are they a program that's pretty much just restarting from the foundation, but they're pretty much the only team that played anybody with a pulse.
That's true. Well, other than Auburn.
Yeah, well, yeah, Auburn had a big win. Now, Alabama had a huge win. Louisville wasn't that great of a team, but I would definitely say that they were competitive, but not competitive against Alabama.
No.
So Alabama and Auburn absolutely look every bit as billed. Georgia looked it, but they didn't really play anybody. Outside of that, I think the conference takes a huge dive after those top few teams, just the way a lot of conferences do.
Sure.
However, I mean, the SEC is absolutely set the stage to have, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bowl eligible teams.
Right. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see how it all plays off. Of course, they all beat each other up through the regular season, but
yeah. Well, let's switch gears, Mike. I want to go with we're looking down now to the start of the NFL season. So we're already tired of all that college football nonsense. Let's move up to the big boys.
The National Football League.
So I've got this labeled the SportsBall NFL preview, or as I like to call it, who are this year's Eagles and who are this year's Browns. And really every single year could be labeled who are this year's Super Bowl winner and who are this year's Browns.
Right. Although I was looking at the power rankings, and the Browns have inched their way up in the power rankings there. So maybe this is the year for the Browns to win a few games.
I don't want to spoil it, but wait till we get to our picks. I like the Browns.
Let's see the NFL power rankings. The Browns right now going into the season are at number 30. They are ahead of the Bills and the Colts. So there you go.
Now, that's interesting because the Colts are bringing back Andrew Luck. So the power rankings are thinking that the Colts are going to be cellar dwellers, even with the return of the guy.
That's what they're saying. I don't know. It's
That's tough. I mean, now Andrew Luck didn't exactly look too great in preseason either. Granted, he hasn't played football in a long, long time, so that's not exactly a huge shocker. Um, Now, Bills, I totally understand that the Bills are in disarray.
Right.
Now,
I think what they're looking at with the Colts too is their defense or lack thereof. They're going to have to put a lot of points on the board to beat anybody with the rather lackluster defensive grouping that they have. So I think that's kind of the bugaboo on them.
yeah, now getting to the front end of this. So actually, you know what? We'll just jump to the back since we already did. Who is going to be this year's Browns? Who do you think is the worst team in professional football this year?
I don't know. Honestly, I feel like I have to go with the Browns until proven otherwise. Um,
Hmm.
and that's just, I mean, you can look like we've talked about the Bills and the Colts already. The Jets, I don't think are going to be very good. Uh, maybe I don't know. You get down to like maybe the Redskins, but I don't know. Right now, until it's kind of like the Super Bowl champ. Until proven otherwise, the Eagles are the champions, and until proven otherwise, the Browns are the Browns.
Yeah, I mean you're probably right. I'm gonna say I'm gonna break it into AFC and NFC. I think for the AFC, I don't think the Cleveland Browns will be the worst team. In fact, I don't even think they'll be the second or third worst team. I think in the AFC you're going to have uh, the New York Jets. I think the New York Jets are going to be the team to lose in the AFC. I just it's hard for me to see them being competitive. They're starting Sam Darnold week one. I've never been a big fan of starting your rookie number one pick in week one of the season. I mean, obviously, there could be exceptions. I certainly don't think Sam Darnold is an exception to that rule.
No.
I don't see the Jets making it very far with him under center. That's now I'm not trying to condemn the poor kid for his career, but the Jets. The Jets are pretty much right there with the Browns on the list of organizations that if I was a number one overall pick, I'm terrified that that's where my career goes to die.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I mean, there is a huge jump between quarterbacking a college football team and quarterbacking the NFL, just in terms of speed, size, and it's a huge adjustment for the best quarterbacks. And then you put them on a bad team, that probably is not going to have the best offensive line. You're not going to have a running game. I mean, that's just a bad mix, no matter who you are. And like you said, Sam Darnold. I mean, it's not like we're talking about, uh, uh, Peyton Manning here. So, and Peyton Manning struggled in his first year. You go back to a lot of these quarterbacks. So, yeah, I'm with you. Putting the rookie out there, even under the best of circumstances, is typically not. I mean, I know you have the exceptions. You have the Zach Prescotts of the world, but he was on a good team too with a running game. So.
Yeah. Now I will say this: even though I picked Jets to be my cellar dweller team this year, it also comes down to schedule. And when you look at the divisions and who you're going to play a couple of times a year, that's obviously going to make a difference to your strength of schedule. I think for the AFC overall, in the AFC West, the Chiefs are the team to beat. I think the Chargers will be better this year than they were last year, and they came on a little bit later in the season. They still have Phillip Rivers, who I still think can play at a high level. I think the Raiders and Broncos both suck. Now, I'm going to go on record right now as saying our good friend Chucky, John Gruden, who has taken over the Raiders after a long stint in the booth, I think he's going to be a total failure. I think that he was run out of the league as a head coach before, not because of any weird accident with HR. I think he was run out because he was a failed head coach. I've never been a big fan of the head coaching carousel, as they say. And even though he went to the booth for, gosh, what was it, like a decade?
Yeah,
I mean, he's been out for a while.
Been out for a long time. The Bucks won their Super Bowl in was it 02, 03?
Yeah. So I'm going to go on record as saying that they are going to regret every penny they gave that guy to come out of retirement. I think he should have stayed retired. I think it's going to be a disaster. Of course, they traded away their generational talent defensive player just this past week that we'll talk about a little bit later. I think the Raiders are going nowhere, and I think they only benefit by getting to beat the Broncos a couple of times because they're even worse.
Right. And I, as a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, I'm, there's a certain love in my heart for Chucky because he brought a Super Bowl to Tampa Bay, but he brought a Super Bowl to Tampa Bay with Tony Dungy's team. And he brought the change of attitude and a change in coaching style, I think, that was necessary for that team at that time. But, as far as his coaching prowess, I was never really impressed either. And here's another thing about Chucky. He's never been able to develop a quarterback. From everything I've ever heard, he's awful with young quarterbacks developing talent. He won in Oakland the first time around with Plunkett. Wasn't it Plunkett? Is that right? Yeah, I think so. And then, he won the Super Bowl in Tampa Bay with Brad Johnson, both grizzled veterans. So, yeah, I don't see that experiment lasting terribly long there in Oakland.
Wasn't it? When was Gannon in Oakland?
No,
Rich
you're
Gannon.
right. It was Gannon. It was Gannon, not Plunkett. Plunkett was before Gannon.
Yes. So to wrap up the AFC, like I said, I feel like the AFC West and the AFC East are similar. Actually, the AFC North may be the only division where I consider the Steelers are definitely the favorite. There's no doubt about that, but I think the teams are closer. All four of the teams are closer in competitiveness. I think in the AFC West, you have the Chiefs and Chargers in the top, and you have the Raiders and Broncos at the bottom, and there's a huge divide.
Yeah.
In the AFC South, I think you have the Titans and Jaguars at the top, and I think you have the Colts and Texans at the bottom, and there's a huge divide. However, I'll put an asterisk on that one. Man, Deshaun Watson played amazing last year for the Texans.
Yeah, that's
before his injury.
Before he got hurt.
If he had started Week 1 that hot, or at all, I believe. I don't think he started Week 1. If he had started Week 1 and not gotten injured, he could have been the NFL MVP. I mean, he was killing it, absolutely killing it. If he comes back and plays at that level for 16 games, the Texans win the AFC South. I mean, win the AFC South as in over the Jaguars.
And here's a $64,000 question: Can J.J. Watt stay healthy for more than 4 games?
Well, you know what? I don't want this to be, sappy, poor Houston Texans stream because I really don't care about the Texans. But the Texans are in that situation that a lot of teams get where the window started to close. You had some pieces, but you couldn't bring it all together, and so then you start rushing to make QB change. You make you make front office changes. You make a head coaching change. You're making these drastic changes after mediocre to better seasons. I mean, they've made the playoffs here and there, but they felt like they had the talent on their roster for better than that. And I would agree to an extent. Yeah. I would agree to an extent they had the talent to perform better than the last few seasons had dictated. But for guys like J.J. Watt, look, J.J. Watt's not 40 years old. His career is not over today. But as anyone who's ever undergone any types of injuries like he has over the last couple of seasons, the older you get and the more those injuries pile up. I mean, how often has it happened? I mean, you think of the Bo Jacksons, you think of some of these other generational talents that no one will ever deny that they could have been one of the greatest to play the game at their position. But it's just a bad break. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you other than, if you tear an ACL and then you tear an ACL in the other knee and then you tear your first ACL again, no matter how talented you are, you're just not going to be the same.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I can attest to getting older, you don't heal. So
I'm afraid that the J.J. Watt, who arguably should have won NFL MVP a few years back over Rodgers, I would argue that guy's gone. I think he will still be a way, way better than average, but I think that guy is not in the league anymore.
That dominating, take over a game kind of player. I think you're right.
Yeah. So AFC South, you've got that huge divide between the top and bottom. AFC East, the divide between the top and bottom is just Patriots and everybody else. I mean, so the only redeeming factor that the Bills, Dolphins, or Jets have is that they play each other twice.
Yeah.
So if you're one of those three teams and you go undefeated against the other two, you will have a deceptively good season where you're a terrible team, but you racked up 4 wins over even worse teams.
Yep. Yeah, that conference is a disaster. I was a Miami Dolphins fan growing up, and when was the last time that the Miami Dolphins had a legit quarterback?
Uh,
I can't even remember. I
well,
guess,
of course, Marino never won a ring, so he's not legit. So
yeah,
a really long
right. Yeah, he
time.
sucked.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
sucked. What awful. So I mean, honest, like on all seriousness, Marino.
I think, yeah. I mean, pretty much.
I mean, that's the tough. I grew up a Dallas Cowboys fan. It's the same thing for Dallas. That when their trio got old and got out of the league from their Super Bowl dynasty in the
Right.
'90s, everybody they had Troy Aikman was never. I mean, he's a Hall of Fame quarterback who had really amazing playoff performances. And has multiple rings, and you can't take that away from him. With that said, he's not a Peyton Manning, he's not a Tom Brady, he's not an Aaron Rodgers, not even close. But he's a winner, no doubt. But after Troy was gone, I mean, they basically didn't have a quarterback under center who you would pick to lead you down the field in the final 2 minutes to win you a game until Tony Romo.
Right.
And that was a long period of time. And Tony Romo was what was he like he wasn't 7th round, 5th round, 7th round, or no, he was undrafted. You're talking undrafted free agent mid-major guy who just so happens to be your saver. And I loved Tony Romo. But that's how long it took, and it was pure luck that you found that. The jury's still out on Dak Prescott. I really don't want to make this whole episode about the Cowboys, but again, I mean, you're talking what, 10 or 15 years without the guy under center?
Yeah, and then poor Romo is another one of those guys that couldn't stay healthy.
Yeah, couldn't stay healthy, and again, when they had the pieces, when they had one of the most talented, highest performing rosters in the league, ancillary factors kept them from reaching their potential. Bad front office, bad management, bad coaching took a team that was absolutely stocked on both sides of the ball, barring a couple of key injuries, and flamed out.
So I'm taking you're not a big fan of the Jerry Jones general manager.
You could say that. I'm actually not as hard on Jerry Jones as a lot of people are because again, it's kind of my same thing towards Chucky, what we were talking about earlier. I think nobody is going to be great forever, and the league changes, and you have to change with it or you're out. And I think Jerry Jones is a prime example of somebody who is just not on the cutting edge of he shouldn't be on the front page of General Manager Weekly.
Right.
With that said, you cannot take away from the man that but he still has made some huge picks and moves, and he's won a bunch of Super Bowls. You can never delete that from his resume, but how far into the rear view does that have to be before you move on?
Right. And he built a hell of a stadium too.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, right. So, in moving to the NFC really quick, so we can wrap up our NFL preview. NFC East, God, I mean, it's Eagles, right? Like Super Bowl defending champion. I feel like it's quite possible that the Eagles are going to have a little bit of that Super Bowl hangover. Wentz is not ready. They've actually already announced Foles is playing in Week 1 because he's just so terrible, right? Nick Foles. Couldn't win a game to save his life, but I think the Cowboys will be better this year with a full season of Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield.
Right.
But I still think it's the Eagles' division to lose, and I think the Redskins and Giants just flat out suck.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Giants are going to be as bad as they were last year, and I think Eli Manning's a decent quarterback, so I think there's some pieces there. I think last year they were worse than what their talent level shows this. So if they play up to their talent level, I think they'll at least win some games and be competitive. But
now NFC North. If Aaron Rodgers is healthy for 16 games, the Green Bay Packers win the NFC North running away.
Right.
I think the Vikings, I hate to tell you this, Minnesota fans out there, I think the Vikings are a one-hit wonder. I think last year was a great year for them, and I think it's over.
I don't know. I think the Vikings, where they're strong is on their defense. I think people are going to still have a hard time scoring against them. Now the question is, will they be able to put points on the board? That's where I could see the drop off coming. But I still think they're going to be a solid defense, and I still think that they're going to be tough to score on.
Well, of course, that leaves us with the Lions and Bears. And if this were the 1950s, man, that'd be a tough division right there. Unfortunately, it's 2018.
Right.
The Lions are one of those teams where when you look at their roster, you look at the talent they have on the field, and they've made coaching changes recently.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like with the Lions, every single year at the start of the season, you think, well, maybe this is the year that they at least move one or two rungs up the ladder. They don't have to win the Super Bowl for me to think that they're a legit team.
Right.
But I expect them to be better because you would just think they would be. But every single year they lose disappointing games. They drop a couple of clunkers against teams that were beatable and then get run out of the stadium by the teams that aren't, and all of a sudden you're 8-8, 9-7, 7,
That's what I was getting
7-9.
When I hear Detroit Lions, the first thing that pops into my head is 8-8. It's like the pinnacle of mediocrity.
Well, and of course for a team that was 0-16 not that long ago, 8-8's pretty good. But again, how long? It's a business. The NFL's a business. It's professional football, and complacency just doesn't fly.
Right.
So being better than 0-16 obviously is an admirable goal.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you can be 8-8 for 10 years.
Right. You can't peak at 8-8. 8-8 cannot be your pinnacle.
And then finally wrapping up with the Bears, I think the Bears will be better this year. I think with a whole 16-game slate with Trubisky under center, I think that they will be better than last year's 5-11. But I still think they're arguably the worst team in that division.
Yeah.
So finally, NFC South, where your beloved Tampa Bay Buccaneers are featured. Last year, the other three teams, Saints, Panthers, and Falcons, all made the playoffs last year.
They sure did.
Buccaneers were the odd men out. So on the one hand, you could say, well, it was a tough road to hoe because you had three other playoff teams to play 6 times.
Indeed. And I would argue that from top to bottom, the NFC South features the best quarterbacks in the league. You've got Bledsoe, you've got Cam, and then you've got Ryan in Atlanta. And then I think Jameis could be a legit quarterback if he could quit acting like an idiot. So
now you meant Breeze, right? Not Bledsoe.
Breeze, yeah.
Okay.
Where did Bledsoe come from? Boy, that went back.
Yeah, that does go back. Now I'm gonna say as my NFL preview, I think the Saints are still the team to beat. I think that last year we definitely saw a step slower and weaker Drew Brees. I mean, you kind of get when you're approaching 40, people are going to give you the benefit of the doubt that, well, you're not going to play as well then as you played when you were 30. If Drew Brees takes another step backwards, then the Saints are going to fall out of that top spot. If Drew Brees can still run the offense at least as well as he did last season, I think the Saints are still the team to beat. Now I think other than a fluky last second play in the playoffs last year, I think the Saints could have gone to the Super Bowl.
I could see that. I mean, I don't think that's outside of the realm of possibility. I think it's interesting that the Saints picked up Bridgewater. I think they're probably seeing the same thing that you're seeing in Breeze.
I think they're seeing that. I think they would like to have a young, athletic guy on the roster. And, of course, Alvin Kamara, talking about hearkening back to happier UT days, Alvin Kamara leaves the cesspool of the Butch Jones UT, goes to the Saints, and in year one, he's just an absolute phenom. Right. It's almost as if UT had talent but couldn't win games. Almost.
Almost.
Yeah. And then finally, NFC West, I think the Rams, again, are still the team to beat. I think Seattle's a mess. I mean, the Legion of Boom is dead.
Yeah.
Pete Carroll, I feel like is in over his head on this one. I think the Cardinals and the 49ers are both still going to be mediocre. I think the 49ers are going to be the challenger. I think the 49ers came on strong at the end of last season. They ended the season with a 5-game win streak with what's his name, Garoppolo. So I think with a full season with him under the helm, I think the 49ers can make a serious challenge for the NFC West, but I think they're at best looking at a wild card because I think the Rams are still the team to beat.
Yeah, I like the Rams. I really like Jared Goff. I think I think he's going to be a good quarterback. He really kind of stepped it up last year. If he progresses again the same way he did last year, they're going to be tough to beat.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot, Mike. What is the Super Bowl matchup? Who versus who in the Super Bowl?
Gosh, I have no idea. I'm horrible at predictions.
No.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that I don't know. I can't even make a prediction. What's your prediction?
What's my prediction?
I'll just agree with whatever you say.
Okay, so until the rest of the league can get their act together, or until Belichick retires, it's going to be New England Patriots on the AFC side. And so really the question becomes, who will Tom Brady lose to this year? And this year, Tom Brady is going to lose to the Los Angeles Rams.
I like it. I can see that. I'm with you on New England. Although I do wonder. Of course, we wonder this every year. But who in the hell is Tom Brady going to throw to? And we wonder this every year, and then some obscure person comes out of the woodwork. So I guess I probably shouldn't worry about that. But you got to think at some point the lack of any kind of named wide receiver in New England's got to catch up with them, or maybe it doesn't.
Well, maybe this is just wishful thinking because I hate the Cheatriots. I hate them so much. Maybe this is just wishful thinking, but I'm going to go on record as saying that the Patriots dynasty is coming to an end within the next couple of years, and I mean for the foreseeable future. And I'll explain why really quick. Tom Brady's going to be gone soon. I mean, let's face it. I don't care what his personal trainer has been pumping him full of that we don't know about. The guy who he won't answer questions about to the press, and the guy that is on again, off again with his role with the team. But Father Time comes for us all. His time is going to be up in the next year or two. It's just going to happen, and it doesn't mean you just know that it'll be this year. Maybe it's not. But it isn't it funny how it always works that one year you can be MVP caliber, and the next year you're not. I mean, it happens that fast. So
it really does.
And with Bill Belichick, arguably the greatest NFL head coach of all time. Asterisk, you cheat too much. I think Belichick obviously has had a legendary run with the Patriots, but I think that he's a guy who knows how to identify diamonds in the rough. He's a guy that knows how to run a professional locker room, and he's a guy who knows how to run a defense more than an offense. And in recent seasons, the offense, way more often than not, has been bailing out the defense, right? Because the New England's defense has not been anything to write home about, but they've managed to stay atop the league year after year with Super Bowl level QB play. If Tom Brady retired today unexpectedly, now granted, I know that's unfair because they wouldn't have much time to prepare a backup, but let's say Tom Brady didn't do so hot this year, age caught up with him, he's out, they draft a new guy, they're moving on next season. And let's say Bill Belichick decides, I've got a little bit more to prove, I'm not ready to quit yet and go home, so I'm going to show everybody that it wasn't Tom Brady winning all these games, it was me. I think that if the Patriots go into the 2020 season with no Tom Brady, everything else being equal, I bet they're an 8-8 team, and I bet Bill Belichick all of a sudden looks very human.
Well, he always looks looks homeless, so there's that aspect of it.
Well, for sure. I know. I mean, I know that that's sacrilege to Patriots fans, and maybe to NFL history, because goodness knows they've had a lot of wins and a lot of rings.
Oh, absolutely.
But I feel it in the wind that their run is coming to an end, and I don't see them retooling and making another run with new personnel 2 or 3 years from now. I think that once that comes to an end, Brady, Belichick, that whole era kind of.
Who's Brady's backup?
Well, it was Garoppolo until they sent him to the 49ers, and then he went on a 5-game win streak. Right. I think that they're going to rue that day.
Yeah. So who's Brady's backup?
I don't know.
Exactly.
I'm actually curious now. I'm actually clicking on it because I have no idea who their backup is. Good Lord. Right now it's Brian Hoyer.
Ah, there you go.
Right now it's Brian Hoyer. So yeah. So didn't Hoyer play for the Browns just a couple years ago?
I think he did.
Yeah. So a Browns reject is their backup, and that's not necessarily to say Hoyer is awful, because everybody who plays for the Browns looks awful.
That's right.
But New England is certainly not devoid of talent. They've still got a lot of young, hungry, good players on that team. But I mean, you have a Gronkowski that you never know. I mean, you never know if his health. He's like J.J. Watt. I mean,
Right.
his health might not hold out. He may just decide that he's done with football. It's not worth the time and the pain, and move on to other things.
He may go completely nuts. I think he's kind of nuts.
Yeah. So I mean, for all we know, Gronkowski and Brady could both be out of the league in a year or two. Who knows? And if both of those guys are gone, and it's Brian Hoyer throwing to whatever Division II former quarterback they sign as a wide receiver next year,
Right.
I mean, I think the Patriots instantly go to a mediocre team,
and won't that shed any tears?
And won't that make the AFC East look interesting? Because the AFC East will become the NFC South from a few years ago, where the best team in your conference only wins 7 or 8 games, and they only won that many because they played a bunch of other crappy conference teams,
right.
and then they go to the first round of the playoffs and lose by 40.
Exactly.
Tom Brady's 41, by the way.
Yeah,
41.
It's only 10 years younger than me.
Yeah. So why aren't you lacing him up? I mean, if he can play for the Patriots at 41, surely you can play for the Jets.
Well, probably part of the problem is I was never a quarterback, so
well, half of their wide receivers weren't wide receivers, so maybe that's your destination.
There we go.
So, any other parting thoughts you want to add to NFL?
No, I'm looking forward to kickoff on Thursday night.
All right. Sounds good to me. Well, let's get in our picks really quick before we touch on any other topics, because I want to get them out of the way. We're doing rapid fire this week, Mike.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Week 2 picks. Got 3 college, 3 NFL, and an upset special. Number 3, Georgia versus South Carolina. Now, this is on the list because, frankly, Week 2 doesn't feature a lot of really high competitive football. They kind of put all their early season highlights in Week 1. Now NFL's staring down the gullet, and we're playing a bunch of cupcakes and just generally unranked versus unranks. Number 3, Georgia, South Carolina. Who do you got?
I've got Georgia, easy, 38-14. It may be worse than that.
I'm going to say it's going to be a little bit worse. I think that there's a lot of early season hype around South Carolina. People think that they're going to make a push in the SEC East because other than Georgia, everybody else is down and South Carolina's up. I'm going to say a big fat no to that. I think South Carolina is always a mid to lower tier team until proven otherwise. 42-10 Georgia. USC, the Trojans facing Stanford. Doesn't it seem early in the year for that? Isn't that usually?
That is early.
I always feel like I remember those Harbaugh versus Carroll, Stanford versus USC games, and they always seem to come late in the year. Yeah. So USC Stanford happening in Week 2. It's probably the most intriguing game of the week as far as rankings, conference, and all that. Who do you have in that?
I've got Stanford, 27-24 over the Trojans.
Really?
Yep.
Now we're different on this one. So I watched the games in Week 1, and while USC didn't exactly show much, I think Stanford was kind of disappointing. I feel like they really didn't play to their ranking. It was more of a game for longer into the second half than they probably would have liked as a tune-up. I think it's actually going to be bad. I think it's going to be 31-10 USC.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Stanford is not real to me. They are not real this year.
You're not real.
Yeah. and finally, because we're grasping for interesting games, it's a conference matchup in the powerful SEC East between your Kentucky Wildcats and your Florida Gators.
Yeah, so here's a fun fact. The last time that Kentucky beat Florida, I was present at the game. I was a student at the University of Kentucky. It was 1986, if I remember correctly.
Ouch.
And I don't think it's going to change this year. I'm picking Florida 28, UK 14. Granted, they just played Charleston Southern, but I liked the way Florida looked. Felipe Franks looked like a completely different quarterback than what he did last year. I like what Mullen's doing in Florida. I don't think Kentucky's got the horses to knock off the Gators in Gainesville.
Again, maybe I'm just a pessimistic guy, but I think it's going to be worse. I think Florida played a cupcake, and that game is literally irrelevant to going into this week. But I think that they at least have some talent on the roster versus Kentucky. Look, whether it's Kentucky or Vanderbilt, you're just going until college basketball season starts. Everyone's asleep in the Commonwealth. So I think it's going to be 31-13 Florida.
Now, I will say this: if Kentucky looked better with their backup quarterback, so we'll see who they end up starting next week. And the one factor that UK does have, they've got a really good running back in Snell. That kid can flat out. He is a legit SEC level running back talent. So
yes,
that's why if they can control the ground game a little bit, that's why I'm making it a little bit closer. But I don't see them knocking off Florida. And if they do, then I'll be sad and embarrassed.
Well, well, be that as it may, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Moving on to the NFL, Thursday night football. We're just a couple of days away, Mike. Thursday night football, game 1 of the season. Atlanta Falcons versus the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. Who do you got?
I'm going with Atlanta in this game, actually, 24-17. And I don't think Foles looked particularly good in the preseason. And I think there's going to be a little bit of that Super Bowl hangover. I think Atlanta's going to be pumped to make a statement. So I'm going to give it to Atlanta. I don't think that's necessarily that Atlanta is going to be the better team at the end of the year, but I think in this first game, I'm looking at the little bit of the upset there.
Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Alan, did you not just say that you thought the Eagles would be suffering from Super Bowl hangover? And did you not just say that the Rams were the team to beat? I did, but it won't be this week. I think the Eagles are just top to bottom a better team, and I think the Falcons' window has closed. I mean, Julio Jones and Matt Ryan are amazing. You take those two guys and trade them out on another team with at least above average lines, run game, and defense, and they're Super Bowl contenders. I don't think the Falcons have any of that. I think their window is closed. I think it's 24-14 Eagles, and I think the Falcons are slip sliding again this year.
Slip sliding away.
Yeah.
There you go.
Tennessee Titans versus Miami Dolphins. Now that right there is not, I mean, you want to talk about like AFC Championship preview, am I right? Tennessee Titans, Miami. I'm actually going to label every single game from now on as either AFC, NFC, or NFL Champion preview.
Love it.
Titans versus AFC or Miami Dolphins, AFC Championship preview. Now, I think the Dolphins just flat out suck.
I think so
really do. But I think the Titans, I hate to say this, I'm in Tennessee. I don't really love the Titans, but I do like Derrick Henry. I do like Marcus Mariota. I want them to do well. I think Mariota's a great quarterback. I think he's a great guy. I'd love to see them succeed. But I just have a feeling the Titans are going to come out flat. New head coach Mike Vrabel is in there, bringing the Patriots pedigree down to Nashville. And I'm not saying that that's not a good idea. I'm not saying he won't work out, but I'm saying they're not ready. I think it's actually going to be 28-13 Miami.
Wow. Well, I'm going the conventional pick. I'm picking Tennessee 21-10. I don't see Miami just doing a whole lot. So,
all right,
I'm playing it safe, going conventional.
You are. God, you're so boring, Mike.
Yeah. Well,
why can't you pick the lane train like me? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, that was yeah.
Yeah.
That one derailed.
Yeah, the lane train got swept off the coast by the hurricane.
It's gone.
So Dallas Cowboys, Carolina Panthers. The Panthers, who were just in the Super Bowl a few years ago, all of a sudden find themselves not exactly a Super Bowl contender. Had some injuries, had some locker room issues. Some guys have departed the team. Cam Newton's still there, but other than his one MVP caliber season, that was the outlier, not the rest of his career. I feel like he's kind of always been a really athletic guy with mediocre stats, with the exception of their Super Bowl run. With that said, Cowboys, I think, are going to be better this year. I think Dak Prescott's going to be better this year. I think Ezekiel Elliott's going to be on the field for 16 games, which is going to enormously help that team. However, they're not making any changes on the sidelines. They haven't made a change in coaching. I think their play calling will still be flat and predictable. I think their defense is still going to be outmanned, and as soon as Sean Lee tears his ACL again, their defense will be bottom in the league. I think it's actually going to be 35-13 Panthers.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm going Carolina as well. I have it a lot closer. I have a 24-21 21 game there, but I like Carolina's defense. I think they can handle Dallas, and I think
I've been dropping bombs this week on teams, haven't I?
You have. You're
I'm sorry.
go hard or go home, I guess, right?
Yeah, I know. I don't know what to tell you. It's always toughest early in the season because you really don't know who you're
You haven't
looking at
seen
and what to
anybody. That's
expect.
right.
Yeah. So, Mike, what is your upset special this week?
All right. Well, this is probably going to surprise some people. I'm going with the Homer upset special. As a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fans, I believe that your Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to knock off the New Orleans Saints in a very close 21-20 game. I've got a couple of reasons for this. I think Tampa Bay's defense is going to be a lot better than last year. I mean, significantly, hugely better than last year. I think that even with Old Fitz filling in for the now suspended for 3 games, Jameis Winston, I think they can put up enough points. I think the defense can hold that New Orleans Saints offense in an opening game. New Orleans kind of has a history of coming off slow. They started off slow last year. So I'm going with this as my upset. They're going to win it for crab legs, which is my nickname for Jameis.
Now, that is quite an upset special. I'll give you credit on that one. That's pretty good.
Go big or go home, right?
Well, in light of that, I'm going to try to one up you, although I don't think it does. I think the Saints are a great team, so I think that's a heck of a pick. I'm going to go all the way. Week 1, Steelers at Browns. I think the Cleveland Browns start their undefeated streak at 1-0 over division favorite Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm going Browns 2016.
I think that's bolder than the Bucs over the Saints.
Well, I mean, when you're coming off like an 0-16 season, I think picking them to win any game is bold.
Well, that's true. Like I said, the Browns are the Browns until they prove they're not the Browns.
Well, what's tough though is that all seriousness aside, even if you think, okay, beating the Steelers is a little bit of a stretch, but let's face it, the worst teams that have ever been, with the exception of last year's Browns and the Lions a few years before, most teams don't go 0-16.
No, that's true.
Or 0-14 like the Bucs way back when. Yeah. The worst stretches of football by the worst organizations that ever put any talent on the field, still by pure accident alone tend to win a game or two.
Right.
So I think that if you're picking the Cleveland Browns to go 0-32, 0-16 again, I think you're crazy. I think they're going to win some football games this year.
You're right too.
So I'm just picking it right now instead of later.
Well, there you go. I like it.
All right.
We'll see how it plays out.
So, Mike, we're just going to have to do a better job of having a tight show because I feel like we've only been talking for like 20 minutes, but I'm looking at my clock and I don't think it's been 20 minutes.
No,
I think it's been a little longer.
We're at like 50, we're like at 52 minutes.
So
maybe this is going to be an hour podcast.
Maybe it is. Well, to even make it an hour podcast, we're going to have to knock out our serious stuff in like 8 minutes. I want to start off with one really quick, and then I'm going to let you fire one. Start off right off the bat. You mentioned it earlier. The 30th iteration of Nike's Just Do It campaign. It's all over Twitter right now, featuring Colin Kaepernick. I just want to say really quick, before we get into this for more than 60 seconds, the slogan on the ad is "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything." Now, you probably know this about me, Mike. I'm a little bit of a grammar Nazi. The first 3 words is capital B, believe in something, period. Space. Capital E, even if it means sacrificing everything, period. That's not a sentence.
No, it's not.
Believe in something is a sentence.
It is.
Even if it means sacrificing everything, it's not a sentence.
And
it's a fragment, and I would give you a pass in a subtitle or a slogan, but they actually went through the effort of capitalizing the B and putting a period after something, and then capitalizing the E and putting a period after it. They went through the effort of making it look like a sentence. Therefore, it's wrong. Period.
Boom. Well, that dispenses with that.
Because that's really what everyone's been up in arms about is just the atrocious sentence fragment.
I will be honest with you. I think the atrocious sentence fragment is probably more upsetting to me than whatever the hell people are upset about, because I just don't care. I don't understand why people care. I don't get it. I don't get the whole thing. I don't care whether or not a football player kneels for the national song. I don't care what Kaepernick has to say or doesn't have to say. I don't care how Nike chooses to market their tennis shoes. I have so many more things to worry about, including the bad grammar in the ad. That's all I got to say about that.
Well, I actually remember talking about this topic years ago on a program. I don't even remember now when it was, but some years back when that was fresh in the national dialogue. And I'll say the same thing now that I said then, which is not only do I not care, but I will maintain until the day I die, the NFL is a business. They're about making money and they're about winning games.
It's all about
and usually winning and you typically winning games helps you make money, and so those things are a little bit linked.
Sure.
Losing games and not making money is where you get in trouble in the NFL.
Exactly.
Colin Kaepernick was losing games, which hurts the 49ers organization. People, I think, have forgotten, other than that one little breakout year when he was running all over the field, it was the debut of the read option offense in the NFL, making its way from college to the pros. And just like that one year with the Dolphins running the Wildcat, if it's something that's new and the defenses are unprepared for it, no matter how good your personnel or your coaching staff is, if you didn't spend all week practicing it and then you see it for the first time on first down, you're in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. And then the defenses catch up, and then it's
and then the defenses catch up. And you know what? For Buddy Boy Kaepernick, the defense has caught up on him in like 6 games. Yeah. I mean, he kind of came on hard late in, I think it was like the 2014 season, and pretty much every minute after that he was, quite frankly, well below average. I looked at the analytics. I think in his last year of football before he was benched and then ultimately out of the league, I think he was 33rd in QBs. So he wasn't, I mean, by any conceivable metric, he wasn't good enough to be the starter for the worst team in the league.
Right.
He was at best a serviceable backup for a middle of the road team. So I don't know why anyone is really that surprised when a bust, I mean, I'm going to call a spade, when a guy who is a bust, who, I mean, Tebow had flashes of brilliance and won a playoff game, but he ain't playing NFL football anymore. No. When you're that guy and you say, I'm not going to do anything but be a starting quarterback, and if you don't want me, then I don't need to be here, and then you make yourself a spectacle after that, and then you're surprised that you don't have a job anymore at that particular employer. Like, why are you that surprised? So putting the spotlight on himself and trying to make it a social issue, I'm not here to debate the social issue. Are there social issues in America? Of course there are. But that you can find a lot better spokespeople for social issues than a washed up second string quarterback.
Absolutely. And this whole idea that he sacrificed so much, he didn't sacrifice crap, because I guarantee you, if he was a really good quarterback, he'd be on somebody's football team right now.
Yes.
I mean, that's where, where the money meets the road, or is that the right even way to say it? Where the rubber meets the road, money. It is the money meeting the road.
Yes, it's the tradition
when the tradition meets the road. If you're a good player, you're going to be playing. I mean, look at the things that have been excused in the NFL because of talent over the years. I guarantee you that if Kaepernick was the quarterback that some people want to pretend like he is, he would be playing on somebody's football team. But he's not a good quarterback, and he's basically a distraction. So, whatever. Like I said, I don't care. This whole issue to me is a non-starter. I'm not offended that some players kneel. I wish they would take the whole national anthem and just not even do it. I mean, why do we have to have a freaking national song before a football game? I mean, it's all Department of Defense sponsored show anyway to advance the warfare state, and I don't really want anything to do with it anyway. So there, I've alienated. I've alienated a lot of people, but that's how I feel about it. I don't care. And
it wouldn't be sports ball if we didn't speak our minds and piss everybody off. So I don't care about your sky cloth. I don't care about your special song, because I don't identify as a cog in that wheel at all. Exactly. I want to see the whole thing burn. I'm just the Joker. That's just what I am, I guess.
Yeah.
So it doesn't hurt. What he did doesn't hurt my feelings at all. I'm more pointing out the hypocrisy on both sides of the issue, that people are screaming back and forth. And here I am just thinking, well, I thought he was a shitty quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know
I
what?
mean, I don't want him to play for my team, and it has nothing to do with what he does in his spare time. It has nothing to do with that. I would much rather have Drew Brees and Tom Brady than Colin Kaepernick, and I promise you it has nothing to do with whether or not they salute the flag.
Exactly. And, you know, as far as the reaction to it goes, I find the whole thing rather amusing because now all of a sudden you've got all of these people who spent years calling everybody on the left snowflakes, freaking out because Nike's got a football player an ex-football player that offends them on their ads. So they're out there burning their Nikes, which is absurd. You know, it'd be like me getting pissed off at Kroger, the grocery store, and like burning all my groceries. You know, what does that accomplish? I'm still pissed off at Kroger, and now I'm hungry. So my response is I want to put on some Nikes and go eat a Chick-fil-A sandwich, and then I can piss off everybody.
Well, this just reminds me of something I was actually talking about on another program this week, which is I don't begrudge people for being ignorant, because the fact of the matter is that the overwhelming majority of people are lucky to be good at one thing and to be really well informed on one thing. And and if it's more than one, they're a generational, cosmic IQ, as I like to say. So I don't begrudge people for being ignorant. You got a life to live. You got stuff to do. You can't be sitting down researching every subject. I get that. That's totally fine.
Sure.
The people that bother me are the people who are ignorant on a variety of subjects, but they make their voices the loudest.
Right.
So Nike has been donating money to Planned Parenthood for years, and let's just call it what it is. It's mostly the conservative crowd that is anti-Kaepernick, anti-kneeling, anti-Nike now. I don't remember any single conservative group saying, well, Nike's funding Planned Parenthood, so we're going to boycott Nike. I remember that in the news exactly 0 times. But Colin Kaepernick is on the front cover of Nike kneeling, and all of a sudden they're burning their shoes as if that fixes it, right? Like as if that changes anything. Burning. So you're showing you've already patronized the company, and maybe you won't patronize them anymore. As economist Bob Murphy actually wrote on Twitter earlier today, I loved it. He said, if you actually genuinely wanted to hurt Nike, instead of burning all of your Jordans, you would be trying to sell them on the secondary market to drive down the cost of their new product.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think that's enough of that.
Yeah. Please, Mike, change the subject.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about Nick Saban being a jerk.
No.
Well, and not that this is a secret. We all know that Nick Saban's a jerk. And you know what? He's a hell of a football coach, so he can be a jerk. But I think most people who watched the Alabama-Louisville game to the end, which I don't know that many people necessarily did that, but they probably saw on ESPN the interview with my girl, whom I love very much, Miss Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
She asked a very legitimate question, and Nick Saban kind of went nuts. And here's what she asked. She said, everyone had questions about who was going to start at quarterback when the game started. What answer did you have about your quarterbacks after watching both of them play tonight? Now, that's a completely legitimate question. That's the question that you ask. If you're a sports journalist, that's the question that you ask. She's doing her job. Nick had to be a dick and, why are you trying to pit me against my other player, one against another, and he got all huffy and puffy. And I think Maria handled it pretty well. She basically just said, I feel you, But, this is typical Nick Saban. And the only reason it really bothers me is because, like I said, I'm in love with Maria. And my wife knows this, so it's okay. Nobody has to send her any emails or anything.
Okay, good. I was worried there for a second.
But, I look at this as a journalist. I come from a journalism background. That's the question I would have asked. I will say this, though. I don't necessarily think that he had to apologize. He answered the question, and you know what? ESPN loved the answer. I mean, that's much better than the typical blah, 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 blah that most coaches give you. I mean, let the guy say what he wants to say. I didn't see any need for him to apologize, but the fact of the matter is he's still a dick. So
I know I had told you before we went on that, I was going to play devil's advocate a little bit and say this reminded me. I know it's apples and oranges. I get that. So first of all, I think you're right. I think Maria handled it well. I don't think what he said was really that bad. I mean, it's not like he dropped a bunch of F-bombs on national television.
That's what I said. He didn't need to apologize. Yeah. He wasn't offensive. It was Nick being Nick. And from what I
Yes.
understand, I know some people that covered him when he was in Miami. They said he was the exact same way. This is who he is. We all know it's who he is. Nobody cares that it's who he is because he wins football games.
Yeah. So I don't think it was that bad, and I think she did handle it well. You have a long history in journalism. I'm pretty sure if that's the worst experience you ever have as a journalist, you're probably doing pretty dang good.
Well, and let's be honest, I think everybody who has been in the journalism world, especially early on, you've asked that stupid question that deserves that kind of answer. And most of the
Sure.
time you don't get that answer. So I just don't think that I think Saban's reaction to the question was way over the top for what the question is. I think it was a legit question. We just watched the football game. It was clear that Jalen wasn't playing nearly at the level Tua was. Does this settle the quarterback controversy? Apparently it did, because we now know that Tua is going to be starting in the game against, I think it's the mighty Northwest Arkansas or something like that.
It's nothing. Yeah, Arkansas State is who they have this week. So I guess, far be it for me. Oh, God, I'm already feeling sick to my stomach. Far be it for me to ever defend Nick Saban. Ugh, did I even say those words out loud?
You're saying it. Here it goes.
Yeah, so I'm going to defend Nick Saban for a second. So I remember, I asked you about this. Do you remember the big "I'm a man, I'm 40" speech from Coach Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State?
I only vaguely remembered it, but I went back and watched the video. And I think you're right. This is apples and oranges.
Well, it is, but it isn't, because it's still a situation where it's obviously a topic that I get it. He's the head coach. Part of his job is talking to the media, answering questions and all that. But if you ask me the question, hey, what's your favorite color? And I say it's blue. Let's stay on the topic of the football program. If you ask me every single week what my favorite color is, eventually I'm going to do everything in my power to have your press credentials removed, because I want to talk about other things. I mean, you can say that, well, too bad, the journalist is going to ask the questions they want. But I tell you what, if there's anybody in this country that has 10,000% job security, it is Nick Saban at Alabama. He is the God King of Tuscaloosa, and frankly, I'm pretty sure he can do whatever he wants.
Well,
as long as they don't find some dead bodies in his trunk of his car, I'm pretty sure he's going to do whatever he wants, as long as he wants to.
I think that would really depend on who the dead bodies are.
Oh, they'll link it to. So he wasn't driving that night, right, for sure.
Yeah,
but that
was Jameis Winston was in that car.
Oh well. No, it was Cam Newton with a laptop.
Right.
But be that as it may, it reminded me of Coach Gundy, the mighty mullet, when he went off in that famous press conference. And I'll always remember two things about it. So for one, the details around that was a situation where one of his players had been demoted. Another player took his roster spot. Look, that happens all the time. That's nothing new or special. But there was a hit piece done by a local journalist who had made it out to be not simply a pedestrian, one guy's playing better than the other, we're going to bump him up on the roster. It was really more of there was malicious intent there, that, well, this player's a locker room problem. He's not getting along with other players and the coaching staff. We're butting heads on a personal level or an ego level. Therefore, we're taking the job away from him, even though he's the best guy for the position, because we don't like him personally. And Coach Gundy absolutely went off. And I'll always remember two things about it. For one, I'll remember that I was actually really, really happy to see him do it, because what it boiled down to is that he wasn't willing to throw that kid under the bus. At the end of the day, I don't know what's true or what's not. I tend to think the report was bogus. I tend to think he was mad because it was bogus. But even if we assumed it was all true and that kid couldn't get along with anybody and Coach Gundy just hated him with a passion on a deep personal level, he still wouldn't throw him under the bus to the press, which to me makes me think that the rest of the locker room must love their coach, because he stood up for his guys. He really did. But the other thing I'll remember about it is I'll remember how much I hated the sports media that week, because every single program, every single talking head on every single network was absolutely raking Coach Gundy over the coals, saying, look at this blow up. God, what a goofball. He sounds so stupid. He got mad over nothing. What an idiot. Obviously, there must be something to this report if he's getting so emotional about it. What's the real story here? And I remember thinking maybe the real story is he's standing up for his players who are just kids. And he's saying, if you want to come at me, come at me. And yet there was almost nobody taking the take of, this is a coach who's standing up for his locker room. And almost everybody took the take of, what a goofball. That really rubbed me the wrong way. And maybe since then I've had a bit of a negative feeling about journalists.
Well, I think that's fair. And I think you have to understand that, like any group of people, journalists are a tribe, and they tend to stick together, and you get a lot of, confirmation bias and repeating of the mantra. So yeah, of course they're going to come together and defend themselves. It's just it's the same way that the cops all come together whenever some rogue cop shoots somebody's dog. I mean,
No.
it's the same kind of thing. So, I do think it's a completely different situation than this was. I mean, like I said, Maria's question was perfectly legitimate. You could say people had been asking him about it up through the beginning of the game, but the game was just played. This is a new question. We just had a game. What did this performance tell you about your quarterbacks? I don't think that was anywhere near the level of what we're talking about with the Oklahoma State situation. But anyway, I'm always going to be a little bit sympathetic to the media because I've been on that side. They have a job to do just like the coaches do, and quite frankly, Nick Saban gets paid a lot of money to deal with the media. That's part of his job. So,
so you heard it here first. Mike Maharrey supports fake news, and he even gave them the Nuremberg defense. They're just doing their jobs.
Yep, there you go. Write it down.
Mike, do you have anything else for this week?
I don't think so. I think we had something else we were going to talk about, but
I still have a couple of things left here in the stack, but you know what? I think this is a good 30-minute show, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up right there.
Well, we could do that. We were going to talk about. We'll give people the quick tease. We were going to talk about the recent contract that the Grand Chicago Bears extended to. I can't think of the dude's first name. Defensive player.
Khalil Mack.
Yeah, Khalil.
So next week, guys, we're going to recap opening week of NFL football because college is probably going to be a little bit slim. Not a lot of really exciting, unless there's a monumental upset. Not a lot of exciting games. We're going to recap the first week of the NFL, have a new list of stories, and we'll make sure next week to cover contract talk. What players are worth what? Is it ever worth it to mortgage a fifth of your entire salary cap on one guy, hundreds of millions of dollars on one guy? Is that worth it? Is it so worth it that picks don't matter when you can get a generational talent? I think that's a good conversation to have. And I still want to cover sports betting because this is the first major NFL season since sports betting has been made legal in all 50 states. But you have some of our best friends in Congress, including people like Chuck Schumer, who no sooner than the Supreme Court struck it down, he's wanting to regulate it back up.
Of course, because that's what they do.
Yeah.
Horrible human beings. They should all be thrown into the Potomac.
Physically removed, so to speak.
Physically removed, and then throw them in the Potomac, and then don't drain the swamp.
Well, I think that should do it for us this week.
I think that's a good place to end it. Drown all of Congress in the Potomac.
Yes,
it took on SportsBall.
Took a sudden aggressive turn for the worse there in the last 30 seconds of the show. So, Mike Maharrey, thank you so much for doing the show with me again this week. This is quickly becoming my favorite thing to do every week is a sports show.
I was telling somebody today that I'm doing a sports-oriented podcast, and it's a lot more fun arguing about things that don't really matter.
Oh, yeah. So, guys, you can catch us on the web. Sports on Facebook is facebook.com/sportsball podcast. The upcoming website URL is going to be sportsballpodcast.com. You can follow this show. So please like and subscribe wherever you're getting this content, whether it be YouTube, again, search for SportsBall with Mike and Alan, or on your favorite podcast platform of choice, brought to you by Little L Productions, which is iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and more. Again, just search SportsBall with Mike and Alan.
Do it. We appreciate you listening, and we'll be back here doing the same thing again next week, except even better.
We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Sports Ball with Mike Meharry and Alan Mosley. You can follow us on Facebook and leave comments, suggestions. Just go to @SportsBall Podcast. That's @SportsBall Podcast on Facebook. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.